So one of the things that is a truism about society today is that we live in an age of distraction. You're probably on your cell phone right now, aren't you? I can see it. Um, that's a real thing. And so while this has become pretty normal, if not detrimental, in our social lives, where it's particularly bad is at work because those people are paying you and they want to know that you're bringing your whole selves and all of your attention to work. And so one of the ways that you're able to actually show that you're, paying attention and processing and committing things to memory is through what we call active listening. And we've never had a guest on our lectures, but we actually have a guest today who is a PhD student in the Department of Agricultural Education and Leadership. And part of her research is actually on active listening in the workplace and what employers are looking for in terms of, you being a new employee and like listening to them. And so this is kind of fun. I've never got to say this before, but please welcome to the program, Laura Hasselquist.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here on this is my first mini NPR stage.
Right.
So I'm actually excited to be here. As Adam said, I am in the department, and one of the things I have studied and do look at is listening. And so it's not just you folks that are empirically bad at listening. It's actually everybody is empirically bad at listening. So what we know is employers really, really want people to listen, and they say that is the skill that their employees need to work on the most. But when we ask employees what they're really good at, they say, we're really good at listening. So there's a mismatch and a disconnect there. And so today I'm just going to kind of walk you through a little bit of the process, talk about some things that you can do to help make it better, and then give you some tips to kind of help you get your foot in the door in the workplace, because managers like listening, and if you can't show that you're listening, they sometimes develop some frustration and problems, right? So to get started, here's what we know, and I think Dr. Klutzer had alluded to this before. Communication really is a process, and it's it's a 3-component process. Like a basic communication has got 3 components: the sender, the receiver, and the message. So as you probably know, the sender is going to send the message out, right? Like this is the person conveying information, and the receiver needs to take that message and process it. To really understand what's going on. And not only do they have to hear the message, but to listen to it, they also have to think about the message and kind of encode that into long-term memory. And there are some behaviors that go along with that as well. So when we talk about listening as a process, it really kind of boils down to like the information processing theory. And if you've had a lot of psychology class, you can kind of this might sound familiar to you. This is really about how we get things into long-term memory, right? And a lot of our information is given, and like the goal is to get it into our long-term memory, right? And so you really have to process it. Anytime we take in new stimuli or new information, our brain kind of undergoes this unique process. So the first thing we have to do is kind of attend to it, right? Like we have to give our attention to that, and we have to focus our attention on that. We know, like maybe if you guys have ever been in an accident or have fallen or just had it where something really just goes very quickly, but your brain slows it down so it feels like that process is taking forever, right? Like, so you can see what's going on. Well, that should tell you how much information your brain takes in all the time. Is like they're taking in all this information, but really you don't realize how many things you're looking at. And so after you've attended to that information or you've paid attention to it, then it goes to your short-term memory. And short-term memory is like 90 seconds to 3 seconds in length. So that's short-term memory. And then hopefully you have done well with your short-term memory and you have it to encode it into long-term memory. So that's anything over like 3 minutes in length, right? And I think we've all experienced this where we fail to encode it into long-term memory or to make it sure it sticks into our long-term memory, right? I think, or at least with me, maybe it's because I'm older. I'm only 32. I'm not that old. But I've done it where someone has introduced themselves like, oh, nice to meet you, Bob. That's great. Talk to them for a few seconds and I walk away and think, gosh, what was that guy's name? Well, I got it into my short-term memory, but I didn't encode it into my long-term memory. And that's a problem because when you get stuff into your long-term memory, that's how you use it, right? So like long-term memory helps you get the stuff done. That's where you can kind of go back and pull it from. And so listening makes that easier and is how you get stuff into long-term memory when you do that. And so the first thing you have to do is you attend something. So you have attention. So you have to give it attention, right? And so here's what we know. Attention is super limited and there are only so many things you can do. So multitasking really does not help you at all. So for all those people of you who are right now on your cell phones or looking at Facebook or cooking dinner or all that other stuff, your attention is split multiple ways. So you're not going to remember everything from this lecture because you can't. Like your attention is going in so many ways that you're just going to forget about stuff. So just be careful. So if you really need to get important information, stop everything that you're doing and focus on that. Okay, that's the biggest thing, is to really center your attention in one specific direction.
I was at a conference one time where they, the keynote speaker was basically like, yeah, nobody can multitask, except for the most rote, mechanical things that you've done a million times. Can you do that and also do something else? And they basically said that what we're doing the rest of the time is called task switching, where you're doing a lot of things, but you're not doing any of them well, or even at the same time, you're just switching between them and in rapid succession, and you're losing a good bit of information. And what's amazing to that is that it took them 60 years and millions of dollars to arrive at that conclusion. And I just feel like if they'd asked me, I could have told them that.
Right. Well, and there also is some research, because if you do what Dr. Klutzer just talked about was task switching, if you chronically do that, there is some wear and tear on your brain. So it's not actually super healthy to do that. I think we live in a society that prides people who can multitask, and
right.
It's not good. I mean, we all do it because we all have to. I will listen to podcasts and cook, but I can tell you I don't remember much about those podcasts.
Right.
Yeah, so just multitasking can burn holes in your brain if you're not careful.
Right, yeah, and so especially what is it with email? Not that you kids ever read your email, but if you get a message and you just look over at that sort of notification, you lose it's something 90 seconds to 3 minutes or something that it takes you to then get back into what you were doing, as opposed to if you just shut off all distractions. But in any event, of course, that's just a big, we're just talking about whenever you're in conversation with some people. Think about all of your friends that you have that you're trying to talk to them and they're on their phones, and maybe you're on your phone too.
It's the worst. Don't do that.
Right. And you're like, did you hear me? And they're like, oh yeah, I totally heard you. But anyway, so on with the show.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, attention is limited. So if you're in a situation where you really need to be attentive to and listen and hear and process the information that's being portrayed, focus your time and attention on that. And the other part of that really kind of helps you do that is your motivation to attend stuff. So you really have to be motivated. And so yes, if it's a lecture that you don't think applies to you, it's a lot easier for you to check out. We get that. But now is the time to really kind of dig in and find that intrinsic motivation to really kind of think about, okay, what is this person talking about? So for example, maybe your next round of presentations, if you have a person who is presenting that is not, maybe the topic isn't your cup of tea. That's cool. But practice this and think about okay, so this person is presenting. What should I think about? How can I apply this to my life? Kind of work on being motivated to listen to what they're saying. Besides, of course, being a good lab partner and developing good lab karma, so people will want to pay attention to that. Okay, so here's what we do know is, so that's kind of how attention and information processing work is, right? You attend it, you focus on it, information gets encoded into short term, and then hopefully long term so you can come back and use it. Well, actually, if you talk to managers in the workplace, or even yourself, because when you talk to your friends, you know this, you can tell right away when people are not listening, and it's really irritating to a lot of people. For one of the studies, I went out and I interviewed human resource managers about listening in the workplace. And they said, I can tell when you're not listening, and I can tell at the exact moment you stop listening to me. And it really annoys them. And it annoys all of us because we're all somewhat narcissists of like, we think we're kind of special, right? Listen to what I'm saying. And so you just need to be cognizant of that. And so the big two things that they talked about was the loss of eye contact. So when we are listening, we have some genuinely like just ingrained behaviors that we start doing. Sometimes there's nodding of the head. Sometimes there's eye contact. Like there's some of those, I'm nodding my head right now as I say that. Mm-hmm. There's some internal wiring that we have to show that we're listening. And there's some evolutionary stuff to that too. But we have those behaviors that they want to see, the classic listening behaviors. But the big thing for them, and this goes back to attention, was electronics usage. Every single person I have talked to in the workplace setting said as soon as my employees are on their cell phone or on their tablet or on their computer, when I'm trying to convey the information to them, I can tell they're not listening, and it makes them very irritated. So put the cell phone away, put the iPad away, put the tablet away. And then if you have to write stuff down, do it the old-fashioned way. But just stay off your electronics. Like those are the two big giveaways. And so, in fact, one of the managers I interviewed actually said, as soon as they're on their electronics, you might as well end the meeting because it's over. Right? Because you can only attend so many things. So your attention has moved from this important information to your phone. So those of you who are on Facebook right now, no.
We can see you. Just kidding.
No. And then to help you out, so we talked about like how they know you're not listening. Well, here are actually what we talk to people in the workplace. This is what they expect of you. Number one, like listen, like just pretend, like even if you have to pretend to listen, be there, like show up, nod your head, make eye contact so they can kind of tell that you're hearing what they're saying and you're processing the information. Again, like that body language comes into play. So nodding of the head, eye contact, facial expressions. Like I don't have a good poker face because you can read exactly what I'm thinking all the time. So that's written all over your face. The other interesting thing I thought was kind of cool is they all wanted you to write stuff down, because how they feel is the information they are giving you is really important and you're going to need it for later on. So write that information down. But write it down with paper and pencil. Don't do your cell phone. Don't do your iPad, stuff like that, because it is a distraction to them. But when you write things down with paper and pencil, they like it.
Sure. This is just a brief aside to like I read this New York Times article recently about how like one of the things with tablets and phones and whatnot is it's not that. Like even just like around the house, like if I'm sitting at the table in the morning drinking my coffee, reading my tablet, is that like there isn't the transparency there, so you don't know what they're doing. If I'm sitting at the table reading my paper, then everybody's like, oh, that guy's reading his paper, like we know what's up. But like there's like a weird sort of secrecy associated with it. There's like the lack of transparency. Like, are they texting or are they taking notes? We don't know. And so if they already are getting the impression that you aren't listening in general, even if you are taking notes on your telephone, they just may jump to the worst conclusion because that transparency isn't there, like in sort of olden times and whatnot. That's why when I go to meetings, I take my iPad because they assume that I'm reading my, agenda, but in actuality, I'm texting. So.
Yeah, I'd also say, this is my little aside. So I study reading and writing in addition to listening. So I studied literacy basically, and that's a bunch of stuff. But anyways, when you write things down with a paper and pencil, we know from MRI scans, different parts of your brain light up because the actual process of putting pen to paper changes things in your brain. It actually helps you remember things better anyways.
It's like a feedback loop, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
You like it comes from your brain. You write it down, you see it, and it goes back into your brain through the visual processing, and so there's like this weird feedback loop that and reinforces the memory. And so you didn't know you were going to get all this on this podcast, on this lecture, did you? At least random facts. Anyway, we should move on.
Yeah, so writing things down is important. And yes, I know I had said earlier, like, they really want you to be attentive and you only have so much attention to give. But for those managers in the workplace setting, writing down key pieces of information is an acceptable attention expenditure, I guess, because you're taking the time to remember it. That doesn't mean write down every single thing that they say, but write down the important information you need to know to get the job done or to go through things. That's important too. And then also ask follow-up questions. That was a big thing they talked about. Their employees being able to ask follow-up questions or clarifying questions to kind of make sure that the employees were taking the initiative to make sure that the information was correct. I know sometimes if we have internships or we're new at a place of business, and I was the same way, you're just so terrified to make a mistake, or you're so terrified that they think you're not very smart. And so you're really hesitant to ask questions. And you're just like, nope, I got it, even though you have a million questions and trying to figure out on your own. And so they actually respect you if you ask questions because they know that you care about that information and you're thinking about, okay, how can I apply this to my life? Or how can maybe I'm not really clear on this bit of information. So is this what you mean when you're saying this? Blah, blah, blah. And so asking follow-up questions is really kind of a good way to make sure that they're aware that you're processing the information. So
it's like an indicator of attention.
Yeah, I mean, like that's what we want you to do. So some tips for improving your listening. Number 1, put your cell phone away. Right? Like I'm sure some of you are still on the cell phone. Yeah, put it in a pocket. Like the world is changing, but it will not change so much in like the 5 minutes that you're engaged in a conversation that you won't be able to get caught up on it. So put the cell phone away so you're focusing your attention on what the person is saying. Okay, also like that motivation, like that's a big piece, so you kind of have to want to listen. So one of the things is think about how this information could apply to you. Could it help you in your job? Could it help you later on in life? Does it explain a situation you've recently experienced? So if the motivation isn't there, try and think about how does this information apply to you? How are you going to use it later on in life? What could you do with it? Next, write stuff down. Key information, record it down. It's a little different. Like in high school, the teacher gets their PowerPoint up there and they start lecturing and you just write down everything that teacher says. You don't have to do that. Write down the key points, the big 2-3 things that you want to take away from the conversation. What is the good thing? The big things that you want to take away. And finally, don't be afraid to ask questions. So think about, what do you need more information on? Maybe one of the questions you need to ask is like, where can I go to find more information about this topic? Or have you ever encountered this situation? Or how do you approach that? And think about those questions and don't be afraid to ask them. So I don't know. Can I give them a challenge, Dr. Klutzer?
Sure.
Yeah. So this week in lab, when you're listening to are they doing persuasives yet?
They're doing persuasives, yeah.
So when you're listening to your classmates' persuasives, really work on this. Like really focus on what they're saying. Maybe write down 2 or 3 important things from each presentation and come up with a follow-up question for each of them. Kind of challenge yourself. Listening is like a muscle. You have to use it and you have to practice to get better at it, right? So get back at it, work on it, build up your listening capacity, and you'll be successful in the workforce. Oh, well, if you do many other things, but it's an important part of it.
Sure.
So
we're all about getting you legs up. Cool.
Yes.
Well, thank you for being here with us today and sharing about your research.